The storm pounded against the tall windows of the Georgia plantation, lightning slicing through the night sky. The mansion's walls seemed to shiver with each clap of thunder. Inside, the mistress moved silently along the polished hallways, her long dress brushing the floor, whispering precise orders to the trembling servants. Her voice carried authority and menace, as if the very air feared to disobey her. Outside, the wind howled like the voices of those long gone, and the grand estate seemed alive with secrets that refused to rest. In the shadows of the nursery, a young grandchild pressed herself against the corner, her small body trembling. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted toward the open door. From the hallway, she could hear the mistress discussing transactions with local traders, her tone casual, almost cold. Names were mentioned, children's names, names that the young girl knew too well. The realization hit her like a dagger. She too could be taken, sold like the others, whispered in that dreadful tone that promised no mercy. The servants moved silently, but their fear was palpable. They avoided the mistress's gaze and shuffled like ghosts through the halls. Whispers traveled from room to room, carried by the wind through the open windows, suggesting that the estate had witnessed these horrors before. Even the grand chandelier overhead seemed to sway with the anxiety in the air. Rumors among the staff hinted at children disappearing overnight, some never seen again. The atmosphere was thick with dread, a tension that gripped anyone who entered the mansion. Lightning struck again, illuminating the portrait-lined walls of the main hall. Faces of ancestors watched silently, their painted eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight. Each painting seemed to judge the mistress's actions, silently condemning her. The grandchild's heart pounded as she traced the paths of the children who had vanished before her. A servant, too fearful to intervene, whispered a warning to her, but the words barely reached her ears over the storm. Every sound in the mansion, the creaking floorboards, the rustle of curtains, seemed amplified, as if the house itself mourned the lost innocence. From the veranda, the rain streaked the marble floors, creating tiny rivers that reflected the ominous sky. The mistress paused, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the estate. She seemed aware of unseen observers, as if the walls themselves carried witnesses of past betrayals. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and candle wax, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Shadows flickered along the walls, sometimes forming shapes that resembled small hiding figures, adding to the grandchild's mounting terror. The mansion breathed, exhaled, and seemed to draw her into its dark history. In the nursery, the young girl clutched a threadbare doll, trying to find courage. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, yet every exit seemed blocked by the mistress's unseen eyes. Outside, the storm's fury mirrored her inner panic, each gust of wind rattling the shutters like whispered threats. She could hear the faint shuffle of feet on the hallway floor, and the mistress's voice, calm and cold, instructing the servants to prepare for the next delivery. It became clear that the child's fate was entwined with a cycle of cruelty that had haunted the plantation for years. Suddenly, a sharp crack of thunder silenced everything for a heartbeat. The grandchild peered around the corner, seeing the mistress pause at the doorway, her eyes glinting with a chilling calculation. There was no warmth, no hint of affection, only cold, precise determination. The young girl realized that the danger was immediate, unavoidable. Each shadow could hide a servant or a threat, every corridor a trap. The mansion seemed to shrink around her, walls closing in as she understood the depth of betrayal she had just uncovered. As the storm raged on, the audience witnesses the tension mounting to a breaking point. Every element, the lightning, the howling wind, the whispers, converges to immerse the viewer in the fear gripping the plantation. The mistress's power is absolute, the children's peril undeniable, and the grandchild's terror real and immediate. The opening chapter establishes not only the sinister environment, but also the psychological horror. A family and a home consumed by greed, betrayal, and the shadows of those who vanished long ago. The viewer is left desperate to know what will happen next. In the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans was punctuated by low, urgent whispers. Servants huddled in corners, exchanging fragments of tales no one dared speak aloud in the mistress's presence. One handmaid, eyes darting nervously, described how a child had vanished overnight, the only trace a small blanket left behind. Another servant shook her head, insisting that loyalty to the family demanded silence, even as fear gnawed at their resolve. The air was thick with unspoken dread, every creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension in the dimly lit room. Outside, in the stables, the horses were restless, stamping and whinnying as if sensing the unease. Stable hands spoke in hushed tones about how the mistress moved like a shadow, commanding absolute obedience. They whispered about nights when children were led through the estate, their tiny footsteps swallowed by the heavy earth. Some claimed to have seen fleeting figures at the windows or shadows slipping along the hallways that should have been empty. The mansion itself seemed to pulse with a quiet, watchful menace, responding to every heartbeat of fear. In the servants' quarters, a thin candle flickered as a young maid recounted a story passed down among the staff, how families had been torn apart, grandchildren sold quietly to distant buyers. Her voice trembled, but no one interrupted, as if speaking louder would summon the mistress's wrath. Each tale layered over the next, forming a chilling pattern. The children were never safe, and the mansion had become a place of silent cruelty. Every creak and groan of the old wooden beams reminded them that this place remembered everything and would not easily forgive those who dared disobey. The cook, an older woman with tired eyes, added her own warning. The mistress never forgot a face or a word, her memory as sharp as a blade. She spoke of the servants who had disappeared, sent away under vague pretexts, never to return. The staff exchanged nervous glances. It was impossible to know if the missing had been sent to work on other estates, or if darker fates awaited. Whispers bounced off the walls, merging with the wind that rattled the shutters, and the mansion's oppressive presence seemed to lean in closer, listening to their every word. Even in the candlelight, the shadows seemed to twist and stretch along the walls, moving in ways that did not match the servants' movements. A sense of being watched grew unbearable, as if the house itself held a memory of every crime committed within it. Every corridor, every dark corner carried the echo of children's laughter that was now missing, replaced by a lingering silence filled with dread. The staff could feel the weight of the mansion's gaze, a constant reminder that the mistress's power extended beyond her voice, beyond her presence, into the very walls themselves. The whispers became fragmented warnings, repeated over and over like prayers to avoid calamity. Keep quiet. Never go near the east wing. The children. The sentences dissolved into stammered murmurs, swallowed by the old beams and the occasional gust of wind. Some servants rubbed at the bruises of fear forming across their minds, sensing that the mansion's shadow reached further than human eyes could see. They knew the mistress's cunning ways, yet nothing could protect them from the creeping, almost supernatural tension that filled every room, every corridor. A young stable boy, eyes wide with panic, swore he had seen a small figure vanish behind the mistress's curtain, only for the fabric to sway as though nothing had passed. The staff exchanged silent nods, sharing a collective terror they could not voice aloud. Even the animals seemed to sense the unease, pawing the floors and stamping in response to unseen threats. Every whispered story, every terrified glance built a tapestry of horror, showing that the mansion itself and the mistress within it held dominion over fear, secrecy, and obedience. As night deepened, the mansion settled into an almost sentient quiet, yet the tension among the staff only grew. They feared sleep, feared the creak of doors, feared the mistress's shadow moving just beyond the candlelight. Each whispered warning became a heartbeat in the dark, reminding them that the children were never safe and that no corner of the estate offered refuge. The viewers are left with a chilling sense that the mansion is alive and that danger, born from both human cruelty and an almost supernatural awareness, is inevitable, creeping ever closer into every room. The children huddled together in the nursery, their small hands clutching each other as the storm outside rattled the windows. Every creak of the old plantation house made them flinch, and each whispered instruction from the mistress sent chills down their spines. One of the grandchildren, a quiet boy of 7, began sketching a crude map in a worn journal, marking hidden corners, locked rooms, and paths through the halls. The other children watched him work in silence, understanding without words that each mark represented a secret, a survival plan in a house that felt more like a cage than a home. Eleanor, the eldest grandchild, felt the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. She tiptoed along the hallway at night, peeking into rooms where the mistress's presence lingered like a dark cloud. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, dancing along the walls as if the house itself were alive, watching and judging their every step. Whispered voices, soft but insistent, floated through the halls, repeating fragments of instructions and threats. The children clutched each other tightly, their imagination blending with reality, unsure where the human cruelty ended and something else began. At dusk, the nursery door would creak open, and a cold draft would snake into the room, carrying faint, unintelligible murmurs. The children pressed themselves against the wall, eyes wide, listening for any sign that the mistress was nearby. Even the smallest noise, the shifting of a chair or the patter of footsteps, felt amplified, echoing like a warning through the plantation halls. Each day became a careful exercise in hiding, in silence, in learning to anticipate the mistress's cruel instructions before they arrived. Fear had become a constant companion, shaping every movement, every glance. The youngest grandchildren, barely old enough to understand, would cling to the older ones for reassurance. Their eyes darted toward shadows that seemed impossible, corners where no one should be, and the whispering voices that no adult would admit hearing. The eldest tried to comfort them, reminding them to stay quiet, to remain still. Yet the tension was unbearable, a silent terror that built with each passing hour. Even moments of brief safety were interrupted by a sense that the mansion's walls were observing them, storing their fear, preparing it to return at the next intrusion. One afternoon, while hiding in the servants' pantry, the grandchildren overheard the mistress speaking to a distant buyer, her words cold and transactional, describing her own flesh and blood as if they were livestock. The children's stomachs churned with disbelief and horror. They whispered among themselves, planning small evasions and escape routes in whispers barely audible over the mistress's footsteps. Every item in the pantry, the jars, the crates, even the shadows between them, became a part of their mental map, part of the fragile strategy they clung to for survival in a home that had turned against them. Night brought its own terrors. Candles flickered and cast long, distorted shadows across the walls of the nursery. The grandchildren whispered to each other, sharing visions of what might happen if they were caught wandering. Each shadow became a potential threat, each sound a signal that danger was near. One child swore they saw the outlines of tiny feet moving in the hall outside, echoing their own, as if the house itself was mocking their attempts at escape. Fear became both a weapon and a guide, sharpening their senses to every subtle cue in a mansion that seemed almost alive with menace. The eldest sketched feverishly, marking safe corners and dangerous zones, noting when the mistress's footsteps approached and which corridors were safest. They began leaving coded messages for each other in hidden places, on the underside of tables, in the folds of blankets, so they could communicate without alerting any adult who might betray them. The tension of constant vigilance sharpened their minds, even as it drained their bodies. Their fear was no longer just emotional, it had become tactical, a survival mechanism in a home where innocence was exploited and darkness was a constant presence. By the end of each day, exhaustion mingled with terror, leaving the grandchildren in a fragile balance between hope and despair. Yet even in their weariness, small glimmers of courage appeared. They shared whispered plans to endure, to hide, to resist in whatever small ways they could. The mansion, oppressive and calculating, seemed aware of every act of defiance, and its shadows stretched longer in response. The children's fear was palpable, almost a living thing, but it also forged a bond between them, a silent promise that even under the mistress's ruthless control, they would survive and remember. The mistress moved silently through the candlelit study, her hands gliding over the polished wood of the ledger. Each name she wrote carried weight, marking a transaction, a human life reduced to numbers and profit. Outside, the wind rattled the plantation shutters, adding a rhythm to her meticulous work. The servants watched from the shadows, silent witnesses to deeds they dared not challenge. The air was thick with tension, every footstep a potential alarm. Fear hung over the room like smoke, blending with the scent of wax and old paper. In the courtyard, traders arrived quietly on horseback, cloaks pulled low, faces shadowed. They carried no weapons, only pouches of coins, and an unspoken understanding that obedience was safer than defiance. The mistress greeted them with a composed smile, gestures polite yet chillingly efficient. Names were exchanged, details discussed in whispers. The ledger passed back and forth like a sacred artifact. Each meeting was brief, calculated, leaving no room for error or hesitation. The children, hiding behind doors and curtains, caught fragments of these conversations, piecing together the cold logic of their grandmother's world. Late at night, one of the youngest grandchildren, curious and desperate, crept toward the stables. His small heart pounded, the shadows stretching long and ominous along the walls. The mistress's voice echoed from the hall, commanding, disciplined, a reminder of the rules that governed every movement in the mansion. For a fleeting moment the child froze, realizing he had been too bold. The mistress appeared at the doorway, her expression unreadable, and the boy retreated, trembling. The near discovery reminded all the children that the line between freedom and capture was razor-thin. The ledger itself was a symbol of absolute power. Each page recorded exchanges, carefully noting age, skills, and disposition. The mistress scrutinized it with meticulous precision, never allowing error or doubt. Traders whispered questions and confirmations, each interaction measured and deliberate. Behind closed doors, servants watched silently, hearts heavy with fear and guilt. The mansion's walls seemed to listen, absorbing each transaction, a silent accomplice to the unspoken horror. Even the night air felt complicit, carrying whispers of deals that could never be undone. Eleanor watched from a hidden staircase, noting every detail in a small secret journal. The movements of the mistress, the rhythm of the trades, the hush in the corridors, all became vital intelligence for survival. Each entry documented the ledger, the timing of the traders, and subtle clues about what might happen next. The children's fear sharpened into strategy. Every shadow, every footstep, every whisper of the wind became a signal to anticipate, to prepare, to survive. Knowledge was their weapon in a household ruled by cruelty and calculation. One night a trader hesitated, his horse restless, sensing the tension. The mistress's gaze cut through him like a blade, and he swallowed hard, offering the coins with trembling hands. The children, pressed against the wall, felt the weight of the encounter like a physical presence. The power imbalance was absolute. No one dared challenge her authority. And yet, each transaction carried a hidden risk, a small chance that the children might glimpse a weakness or an opportunity to escape. Fear was omnipresent, but it also bred a sharp, silent awareness. The mansion's servants whispered among themselves, careful to be unheard. They shared rumors, exchanged warnings, and speculated on the mistress's plans, but never too openly. The ledger dictated the night, and anyone stepping out of line faced consequences. The children listened, learning the patterns, memorizing the hours, and the ways the mistress communicated silently with her traders. Every transaction was a lesson in the cruelty and cunning of human nature. a reminder that survival required more than luck. It required observation, cunning, and timing. As dawn approached, the mistress closed the ledger and extinguished the candles. The traders departed silently into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving the plantation heavy with secrecy and fear. The children stirred cautiously in their hiding places, whispering about what they had witnessed. Each event, each exchange, became part of their understanding of the mansion and its mistress, shaping the strategies they would need to stay one step ahead. The night ended, but the dread lingered, a constant reminder of the calculated menace that ruled their lives. The servant stumbled upon a room long sealed, the hinges stiff with rust. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by his cautious steps. As he moved, he noticed objects slightly shifted, a chair angled differently, a faded blanket folded in a new pattern. The temperature dropped, a chill crawling up his spine, and faint whispers seemed to echo from the walls. He froze, convinced he heard the soft cries of children long gone. The plantation's grandiosity felt oppressive now, as if the mansion itself remembered every act of cruelty committed within its walls. Shadows flickered along the ornate wallpaper, cast by the candle he held, but the shapes seemed almost alive. A rocking horse creaked softly on its own, and a small journal lay open on the floor, its pages covered in childish handwriting. The servant's heart pounded as he realized he was not alone. Though no figure was visible, the atmosphere felt charged with unseen eyes watching every move. Every whisper carried weight, hinting at secrets too heavy for the living to bear. As he explored further, faint footprints appeared in the dust, leading toward the attic stairs. The servant's mind raced. Could the children's spirit still linger, trapped in the plantation's labyrinthine halls? Each step echoed unnaturally, carrying an almost melodic resonance, like a lullaby distorted by sorrow. The whispers became clearer, almost forming words, calling names and recounting small acts of daily life, mundane yet terrifying in their context. It was as though the house itself was narrating the horrors it had witnessed. He paused near a cracked mirror, its surface mottled with age. Reflections seemed slightly off, shapes that didn't belong. Fleeting glimpses of small figures standing behind him for a heartbeat before vanishing. The air vibrated with tension, heavy yet almost tangible. The servant felt an urge to leave, yet something compelled him forward, a combination of curiosity and dread. The plantation was no longer merely a home. It was a silent observer, a vessel holding echoes of a past too cruel to forget. Whispers escalated, layering over one another like a chorus of sorrow and warning. The servant's candle flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to shift independently. He noticed carvings on the wooden beams, symbols and initials scratched decades ago, almost as if the children themselves had left messages for anyone brave enough to look. Each mark amplified the sense of a lingering consciousness, a memory embedded in wood and stone, refusing to fade despite years of neglect and silence. From the corner of his eye, he glimpsed movement, a small hand disappearing behind a doorway, a fleeting shadow darting across the floor. Though unseen, the presence was undeniable. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying a faint scent of old fabric and candle wax, and with it an unspoken message. The plantation's history could not be rewritten. The servant shivered, recognizing that the children's experiences had left an indelible mark on the very structure, transforming it into a silent, haunted witness. He retreated to the hallway, glancing back as the door creaked shut behind him. The whispers lingered, fading, but never fully disappearing. It was as if the house itself exhaled, leaving him with the sense that every room, every floorboard, every shadow was imbued with memories of pain, fear, and survival. The air felt heavier, charged with unseen energies, and he realized that the plantation had become more than a home. It had become a repository for ghostly observation, forever keeping watch over the legacy of its darkest deeds. By dawn, he left the room, shaken yet compelled to return another night. The experience was etched into his mind, a combination of fear and awe that made sleep difficult. Each creak in the mansion now held potential significance, each whisper a possible message from the past. The children's presence, subtle yet persistent, transformed the estate into a living narrative of horror. The plantation's ghostly witness was no longer a rumor or legend. It was a tangible, haunting reality, silently reminding all who entered that some memories refused to fade. The servant's hands trembled as he ushered the youngest grandchild into a hidden cupboard beneath the staircase. The dim light barely reached the child's frightened face, wide with panic. Every creak of the floorboards seemed magnified, every distant clap of thunder echoing like a warning. Outside, the mistress's footsteps rang sharply against the wooden floors, methodical and deliberate. He held his breath, praying she wouldn't hear the suppressed whimpers. The moral weight of his decision pressed heavily upon him. His loyalty to the children was at odds with the fear of the mistress's wrath. The mistress's voice suddenly sliced through the corridor, sharp and commanding. "I know someone is hiding. You cannot disobey me." The servant felt his heart freeze. He clenched his jaw, whispering reassurances to the child, urging silence. The shadows seemed to close in, the mansion itself almost aware of the defiance taking place. Each step she took echoed like a drumbeat of impending doom. The servant's mind raced, calculating risks, considering escape routes, and mentally weighing the consequences of every action. He ventured out from the shadows, pretending to clean the hallway, each movement deliberate to avoid suspicion. The mistress's eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room. There was a tension in her gaze, an unspoken knowledge that someone had defied her. The servant's palms were damp, his chest tight, but he remained composed, forcing a smile that barely concealed his terror. The child's muffled breathing from the cupboard reminded him of the stakes. Discovery would mean punishment not only for him, but for the innocent hidden just feet away. The mistress moved closer to the hiding spot, her presence suffocating. "I warned you. No one betrays me," she hissed. The servant felt the air thicken, as if the mansion itself conspired with her, every shadow stretching toward him. He gritted his teeth, knowing he had to confront the situation without revealing the child. His voice, steady yet strained, responded with careful obedience, feigning ignorance. Each word was a gamble, every pause a potential revelation. The scene vibrated with unspoken danger, suspense gripping the invisible audience. A sudden gust of wind rattled the tall windows, causing candles to flicker and shadows to leap across the walls. The mistress froze, her eyes narrowing. The servant used the moment to inch toward the cupboard, gently placing a hand over the child's shoulder, offering comfort. Every heartbeat felt amplified in the tense silence. It was a standoff between raw authority and desperate morality, and the mansion seemed to hold its breath along with them. The tension was unbearable, leaving the audience on edge, fearing a catastrophic discovery. The mistress's footsteps resumed, deliberate and menacing. She paused near the cupboard, sensing something amiss. The servant forced a casual cough, hoping it would distract her. She tilted her head, eyes piercing, as if she could see through walls. The child whimpered softly, betraying their presence, and a sharp gasp escaped the servant's lips. Time seemed suspended. Every second stretched infinitely as the mistress's gaze scanned the floorboards. The fear of exposure reached its zenith, a palpable energy that tightened the chest and constricted the throat. Finally, the mistress moved away, seemingly unconvinced but unwilling to investigate further. The servant exhaled slowly, heart pounding like a drum. The child emerged, trembling, and he whispered reassurances, wrapping them in a protective embrace. The mansion remained eerily silent, but the shadows seemed to shift in acknowledgement, as if the estate itself had witnessed the courage and moral resolve displayed. For a fleeting moment, the servant allowed himself relief, aware that danger had only been postponed, not eliminated. By night's end, the servant knew the confrontation would leave lasting consequences. The mistress's fury was contained, but not extinguished. and the risk of retaliation lingered. The children remained hidden, but the psychological weight of defiance pressed upon everyone within the plantation. The mansion, with its long corridors and shadowed corners, seemed alive, observing the struggle, its presence amplifying the suspense. The confrontation had reached its peak, leaving the audience fearful for the characters, yet enthralled by the moral complexity and tension of the unfolding drama. The servant crouched in the dim hallway, heart pounding like a drum in the silent mansion. The storm outside rattled the windows, masking their subtle movements. Each child clutched a small bundle of belongings, eyes wide with fear and anticipation. He gestured silently, urging them toward the rear door. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting with the flickering candlelight, as if the plantation itself were testing their courage. Every creak of the floorboard made him flinch, each echo threatening to betray their presence to the mistress. A distant clap of thunder covered their cautious steps as they approached the back corridor. The children whispered reassurances to each other, barely audible, but enough to break the tension momentarily. The servant paused at the top of the stairs, scanning the floor below, knowing that one wrong move could doom them all. The atmosphere was thick with dread. The air charged as if every corner of the mansion watched, anticipating their next decision. Their breaths came in shallow bursts, synchronized with the rhythmic tapping of rain against the roof. They reached the servants' hidden passage, a narrow route once used for supplies. Cobwebs brushed their faces as they crawled, hearts racing with each movement. The mistress's distant voice echoed through the halls, sharp and commanding, as if sensing the defiance. Lightning illuminated the space briefly, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach for them. Fear clung to their skin, the suspense tangible, and every second stretched, leaving the audience on edge, uncertain if they would succeed or be caught. Halfway down the hidden corridor, a child stumbled, the sound cracking the silence like glass breaking. The servant froze, heart in his throat. The rain outside pounded harder, masking the noise, giving them a slim chance. He whispered words of encouragement, steadying the trembling child. Shadows seemed to press closer, the mansion alive with anticipation. Every creak, every gust of wind became a threat. Their escape balanced on a knife's edge, each step fraught with peril. As the audience wonders if freedom is truly possible, they emerged near the edge of the plantation, the open night air a shocking contrast to the oppressive mansion. The children gasped, clutching each other tightly. Moonlight revealed the path toward the forest beyond, a narrow line to safety. The servant motioned forward, urging silence. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set nerves on edge. The mansion loomed behind them, silent but omnipresent, a reminder that danger still lingered and the mistress's reach might extend beyond the walls. A sudden noise startled them, a shadow moving in the tree line. The servant held his breath, urging the children to stay low. The wind carried whispers that sounded eerily like the mistress's voice, or perhaps it was the imagination of fear. They moved inch by inch, hearts hammering in sync with the thunder above. The plantation, a looming figure in darkness, seemed to anticipate their every action. The suspense was nearly unbearable, leaving viewers to question whether the children would reach the forest or be dragged back into captivity. They reached a creek that marked the edge of the estate. Water glistened under the pale moonlight, offering a moment of relief. The servant motioned for the children to follow him quietly, knowing that crossing would take courage and precision. The mansion's silhouette remained in the distance, ominous and unyielding. Each splash of water sounded disproportionately loud in the silence, as if the estate itself were listening. The audience feels every heartbeat, every footstep teetering between hope and despair. Finally, they emerged into the dense forest beyond the plantation. Relief washed over the children, but the tension remained, for they knew the mistress's power could follow them. The storm continued to rage, lightning illuminating the path ahead. Every shadow hinted at pursuit, every rustle of leaves suggested danger. The audience is left gripping the edge of suspense, witnessing a fragile victory that is still shadowed by uncertainty, as the story teases whether true freedom is ever attainable. The once grand plantation is now overgrown with weeds, its walls crumbling under decades of neglect. Windows gape like hollow eyes, and the gates hang crooked, squeaking with every gust of wind. Locals avoid the property after dark, claiming that shadows flit behind broken panes and that faint crying drifts through the overgrown courtyards. The air itself feels heavy, as if carrying whispers from a long-forgotten past. Visitors sense a presence lingering, watching, as if the estate refuses to let go of its dark history. Farmers working nearby recount sudden chills that crawl across the skin when passing the main house. Some swear they see small figures moving between the ruins, glimpses of children running along the hallways that no longer exist. The wind seems to carry muted sobs and faint laughter, echoing the lives once trapped within the walls. Every creaking board and rustling leaf becomes a subtle reminder that the plantation story is not fully buried, and the mistress's influence seems to haunt every shadow. Children playing near the edge of the property report feeling watched, sometimes seeing glimpses of the grandchildren who were sold so many years ago. Their parents dismiss these accounts, but the unease persists. The estate radiates an intangible weight, pressing on all who come near. Even daylight cannot erase the sense of history bleeding into the present. Visitors leave with shivers that linger long after the sun has set, carrying the story of betrayal and greed into local legend. Some paranormal enthusiasts have attempted to document the strange occurrences, setting up cameras and sensors in the mansion's remains. Occasionally, they capture fleeting images of small figures darting through rooms no longer intact. Audio recordings pick up faint voices, whispers that sound like children calling for someone who will never return. The investigators leave unsettled, convinced that the plantation has retained the memory of every injustice, every act of cruelty, and that the estate itself is a silent witness to history. Historians recount the stories of the mistress and her actions with solemn faces. Local archives preserve the transaction records, names, and dates that confirm the horrifying truths. Yet, despite knowing the facts, the fear of visiting the estate remains pervasive. The legend grows, fed by glimpses of shadows, the feeling of eyes upon you, and the occasional unexplainable sound echoing in the halls. The plantation has become a cautionary tale, reminding generations that some deeds leave a mark far beyond their immediate time. At dusk, the setting sun casts long shadows across the estate, transforming the ruins into shapes that suggest movement. Windows glimmer faintly, like eyes reflecting the last rays of light. Those who approach swear they see the children's forms fleeting through the trees, sometimes crouching in corners that no longer exist. The atmosphere carries a weight of remorse and terror, a history frozen in time. Even birds avoid perching too close, as if the echoes of the past demand silence, leaving a permanent impression on all who dare venture near. Travelers who stay nearby report strange dreams, glimpses of the mistress, children, and rooms that seem to shift and expand beyond the boundaries of reality. The line between past and present feels blurred, as if the plantation's legacy seeps into the minds of those who learn of its history. Each tale adds layers to the collective memory, creating a chilling narrative that no archive or historian can contain fully. The estate remains a silent, haunted witness, reminding all that some acts of greed and cruelty echo endlessly. Ultimately, the plantation stands as a monument to a haunting legacy, a place where sorrow, fear, and injustice are forever intertwined. The mistress's name is never spoken lightly, and the shadows of the children remain a lingering presence. Locals leave the area quickly, sensing that the past is not just remembered, it is alive. The story concludes with a sense of unease and unresolved horror, leaving viewers to contemplate the permanence of human cruelty and the inescapable marks it leaves behind.